Welcome to this video. This is round 4 of the Sinquefield Cup, rather shortly released after round 3, but this time I'm quick with covering that round, which is only finished about 2 hours ago. Yeah, I think about 2 hours ago. So let's get going. I'm doing this a bit differently than the first couple of videos because now I have a little bit more time on my hands. I'm going to look at one game in particular in more detail. That will be Wesley So with white against Aronian, but I will also briefly show you the other games. In this case, really briefly, because they weren't that interesting. I have to be honest there. The main game that I'm going to feature is interesting and really nice. The other games, not so much. But let's have a look what happened to get an idea about the full picture. So Giri Carlsen, let's start with that. We got an open Sicilian, which is rather surprising, as Giri is not a very regular 1e4 player. He does play it, but not in the majority of cases. And quite often nowadays, the open Sicilian after knight c6 is dodged in favor of the Rossolimo. In fact, that's the reason why I'm not playing the Sveshnikov, because people always play bishop b5. Anyway, d4. We now get the Sveshnikov. Yeah, the starting position here, where white has that the choice, the typical choice between knight d5 and bishop takes f6. Knight d5 is the more strategically focused continuation and was chosen here by Giri. Bishop e7 takes c3. For a while c4 was all the rage there, but it seems that this is rather defanged nowadays. At least it doesn't seem to trouble black that much. c3 is the traditional line. Carlsen played knight e7, which is a sideline and a line that has been played really a lot by Michal Krasenkov, now it's currently Polish grandmaster. Krasenkov is a very sharp, enterprising player, and he also has written a book on the Sveshnikov, and he has knight e7 there quite a lot. An interesting continuation that normally white answers with this, and we have a sharp game with the pawn structure being somewhat damaged. Yeah, for example, something like this is kind of normal, where black sometimes in a situation like that even can consider to castle long, rather sharp stuff. But Giri didn't go for that. He went knight c2. We see that he spent quite some time there, so probably it wasn't a continuation that he was so familiar with. As I said, he's not a very frequent 1e4 player. Carlsen traded, and now he doesn't have a double pawn. Here black's compensation for the slightly weakened structure is the bishop pair. Quite often we will get a situation as we have it in the game. This I think feels rather logical, white getting the knight over to d5. Quite often we will get a situation where that knight is going to be taken by the bishop, and then we've got opposite colored bishops, f6 against e2. In those kind of structures, and we see it in the game, black went in b4, takes, and shortly afterwards, we see some trades here. And now Carlsen liquidated that knight. Now we get that opposite colored bishop situation. The only thing that can happen is that black is getting into a position where that bishop is somewhat awkward here on that diagonal, putting some pressure on f7. This is not so easy for the black bishop. The black bishop on g5 is a little bit, it's not terribly bad. It's just not fulfilling any active function at the moment. And this is the only thing that black has to be a little bit wary of, that he's not kind of getting into a situation that he's got lots of pressure on f7. But it didn't happen in that game. Carlsen had everything under control. Bishop d1 trying to get there. The problem was that this is failing to rook c4. Or if you go rook d7, it's also not leading to much. And here you have to think about those kind of continuations. It can be quite awkward for white. So ultimately nothing happened here. Yeah, we had a couple of more moves, and here the game was drawn. Very correct game, not very exciting, but rather correct, let's say, from both sides. I think one key point really was very early, when after knight e7, Giri dodged that invitation to get a very sharp position after the capture. Knight c2 is just a little bit too tame to get too much on that level. It is very safe, however, so he wanted to play a safe game probably, so it worked out. Has to be noted that Giri has a great score against Carlsen. I think he has 1 win and no loss, so it's not. It's always important to keep those things in mind. Okay, so let's go with MVL with white against Hikaru Nakamura, and we've got 1 d4. Vashila Graf plays every opening move, e4, d4, c4, everything. So here I've got d4, and Nakamura goes for King's Indian. Yeah, it's basically showing directly that he's in for a fight, and we got a fight. That game was interesting. The only reason that it's not featured as a game of that round is that the other game was just better, or yeah, more spectacular, however you want it. I think it's the natural choice, as we will see later. Okay, the Samish variation with 92, and Nakamura goes with c5. This is believed to be best against the Samish nowadays to get into a Benoni structure. One point of that Benoni structure is that the knight on d2 is quite often basically forced to move again, as otherwise you cannot get your bishop out, and the knight on g3 is often, as we see, attacked by this, and this means that white loses a lot of time. White's structure, that pawn chain, is very healthy and quite resilient, but he loses time, and black gets counterplay like this, and with f5 coming. Also note that bishop d4 can be quite an interesting option. But white has knight f2 though, so it's not like winning material. Bishop e3 and f5, a key counter punch. For black in this kind of position, it's absolutely essential that you have to play actively. Black cannot just sit around and let white reorganize behind its pawn chain. You have to nibble at that pawn chain very, very quickly. f4, interesting, looking at that knight, and queen e8, trying to use that somewhat precarious situation on the e-file. Yeah, and now all hell breaks loose as takes and e5 is played. What a mess. Yeah, those pawns look completely messed up, and white is breaking through in the center. Yeah, black has to take it, and then d6, yeah, getting this into the game. Yeah, a complete chaos. It's very difficult here to say something reliable in the context of just covering that game quickly with in a couple of minutes. It's just ultra complicated. One thing that I definitely want to show is that a couple of moves later, here h3 was played, takes, rook e1, yeah, total craziness. That a couple of moves later, exactly here in this position, knight e4 probably wasn't a great idea. Here the computer points out a clear improvement on Vashila Graf's play, which is rook e2. That seems to be really strong. The idea is to take on g2 with the rook, and king h1, rook ag1 is a possible continuation. This seems to be really, really, really good for white. The computer is on +1 point something and basically claims that white will win here. That's maybe true, but it's difficult to analyze. King h7, rook g2, for example. Yeah, it's very close that some kind of sacrifice might work. White is attacking with almost all of his pieces. I shouldn't forget that. And he's got the dangerous d-pawn still on the board. Probably rook e2, rook g2 would have led to something really, really dangerous and maybe a win for MVL. But he didn't do that. He played rook d1. And the whole situation is entirely unclear.
Check.
That trade, however, now brings us nearer to an endgame. Black is a pawn up, but the bishops are of opposite color, and we know that this quite often will increase the drawing probability. Again, white is a pawn down, but it's opposite colored bishops.
Check.
And the way it went,
Check.
actually, yeah, we had this traded, and he even gave up that d-pawn. Yeah, the point is that what white wants in this types of positions is you want a defensive setup that is reliable, and quite often it is the case that one flank has to be kept by the king and one flank has to be kept by the bishop. In this case, he's basically forcing black to push that forward, and now after king d4, b5 and king here, we see that bishop and king, they safely blockade those pawns. They are not going anywhere. The bishop is also able to protect the b2 pawn, the h2 pawn, I'm sorry, so that if black marches with his king all the way to the pawn, we can safely protect it with that bishop. It is, despite 2 pawns down, just a draw. Yeah, nothing more, nothing less, and they continued a little bit here, but agreed to a draw.
Check.
Even here,
Check.
yeah, it's
Check.
still a draw because
Check.
there's absolutely no way forward. Yeah, like here, white can check, and
Check.
what are you doing if you go here? I mean, white can even do this and completely blockade everything off. It's just a total draw. It's opposite colored bishops. For you, they quite often simply kill the game off. Okay, have a look at Grishuk Topalov. Yeah, we have many Sicilians in that event. Yeah, did you recognize that? Many more than we have had in earlier high-level events where Berlin defenses or other e4, e5 defenses against 1e4 were dominant. And here we've got tons of Sicilians, so that's really good news. Topalov here playing the Nido, of course. Yeah, bishop e3 here by Grishuk. They flicked that repetition in, and now Grishuk, of course, avoids it. Yeah, nobody wants to repeat with white on move 7 or on move 8. f3. This is actually a slight concession on white's part. Yeah? He says, okay, I'm playing f3 first, then bishop e3, but committing early to f3 has some disadvantages, as it basically tells black already, okay, I'm going to play f3 no matter what, because a difference can be that if you look at this, it's not so clear that white needs the f3 move. For example, after e6, he can also go g4 here. It's a very sharp line, or let's say in some situations, let's say here, white can also switch. That's probably a bad spot, but let's say knight c6. Oops, I'm sorry. Knight c6. This, and then f4. Let's say. Yeah, we are still flexible when we don't play f3 that early. Okay, but this is how it went. e5, and now bishop e6, bishop e3, and now h5. Yeah, this is all the rage in many Sicilians, and the idea is really very modern. Yeah, some years ago, like starting in the 1980s and 90s, it was established that g4 is a very dangerous continuation for white in many Sicilians. And nowadays, the answer by black is simply to just dash out h5 before g4 is even coming. Quite an interesting approach. I think in this particular move order, it makes quite some sense, because white's plans without g4 are somewhat limited. g4 is not just an attacking move, it is an attacking move, but it's not just that. It also has some strategic ideas by pushing the knight f6 away to establish more control over d5, for example. h5 is just cutting that possibility completely, g4. Yeah, knight d5 was played, occupying that central square. Took it with the bishop. You can also take with the knight. This also has been played before and seems to be okay for black. However, here the move h5, I'm sorry, the move h5 doesn't really help black that much in this structure. You'd rather have it back, because once this pawn structure is changed, g4 is far less attractive. Okay, took it with the bishop, and now 97. Here black's idea, amongst others, is to try to maybe put some pressure on their pawn. Queen d2, g6, long, knight b6. That is the idea. Yeah, if white goes c4 now, he will have some problems after rook c8. c4 is hanging and d5 is hanging, which means that, yeah, something is going to fall. That was Grishuk's choice. Yeah, and now Topalov just took that pawn. It was quite funny that after those moves, Grishuk sank into deep thought and played knight a5. So let's check first what's happening here. So king b1, knight bd5, as we said, this was played. Black has won a pawn, but make no mistake, he's far behind in development. White already has castled, had time for rook b1, king b1, I'm sorry, and rook is on d1 here after long castles. White definitely has compensation. Knight a5, attacking that pawn, and yeah, being flexible. Sometimes the knight might come to c4. White has an initiative for that pawn. Rook b8 covered, bishop c4. Yeah, gaining time on that knight. Knight returned, and now bishop f6. It seems that bishop f6 is a key moment where probably White's cause has to be improved upon. Maybe moves that simply continue the whole thing without being too forcing were more interesting. For example, the computer suggests rook h to e1 here, simply centralizing and keeping everything, keeping the tension. If black is castling now, then white will have a strong initiative with many moves. One thing that also that always is in there is the move bishop h6, trying to drive that rook away and then do something here. Also, bishop b3 does make quite some sense, keeping that bishop on the board, and it is a strong diagonal, and asking black again, okay, what exactly is your next move? Yeah, the rook h e1 has very safely prevented a move like d5. I think here white has definite pressure for that pawn that he has given. After bishop f6, however, we get some simplifications, and at the end, this slight, let's say, yeah, from looking at it optically, let's say, it looks like white is better. He's more active, but it's really nothing serious. Rook d3 was played on rook e1. This is good. And check. Rook e5, king f8 now is awkward. We lose some material. Yeah, rook went back, and the thing is, you maybe already suspect what will happen here. We have got some trades. Now knight c4, opposite colored bishops again. And here it's a case where absolutely nothing happens. Yeah, they continued one or two moves and now agreed to a draw. So not very exciting, but a rather correct game. Probably this bishop f6 move here, when we jump back quickly, bishop f6 in this position was probably a little bit too simplistic to go for something. Keeping the tension with rook h e1 looked more promising. Okay, so Caruana Anand. Let's have a look at that game. Yeah, the semi-Slav, one main feature of Vishy's opening repertoire for his whole career. Really, he already had played that in 1991. It was 24 years ago, 1991, when he played his candidate match versus Anatoly Karpov, where he just very unluckily lost. Yeah, and he was dominating that match, but ultimately, yeah, cracked under the pressure probably. Back then even he had played it, so a huge experience that Anand has with that opening. Caruana goes with bishop g5, after which black has some choice. Anand actually just about, let me think about it, last year in December, I think, in the London Chess Classics, he played the move d takes c4, the Botvinnik variation. And this was surprising because the Botvinnik still has a slightly dodgy reputation, but Kramnik didn't get anywhere and he knows his openings. So an interesting indication that maybe the Botvinnik isn't that fishy. It's also featured in a recent book by Lars Schandorf. So maybe the Botvinnik, if you are a little bit crazy and have time on your hands, you can try it. h6 is the more solid move, after which white can sacrifice a pawn with bishop h4, like this. The anti-Moscow gambit. This is because h6 is the Moscow variation. Bishop f6, queen f6 is the main line again nowadays. And here black is basically trading the bishop pair against flexibility and some space. White in this game here went for a very quick e3-4. White has to really delicately time his pawn breaks and pawn structure changing moves, because black has the bishop pair. If you use your space and open up the position in some wrong way, then the bishop pair will be super important in that type of game. But it's interesting how he played here with e4. Queen d8 by Anand, just retreating. And now rook e1 was played, looking very normal. c5, very interesting move. Yeah, black is really saying, okay, I've got that bishop on g7 that is unopposed, and I'm not going to accept that you maybe want to clamp down on me. Yeah, just for example, if black is doing nothing, which is actually not that easy. Let's say you play something like that. And just imagine a position like that where white would enjoy the space. He has h4 and it's rather one-sided. And here c5 that blasts open the whole center. And white really doesn't have anything else than taking on c5. I really don't see any useful alternative. I mean, white can... he took there and then on c5, I'm sorry. But you have to take on c5 somehow. Yeah, it's otherwise not... this happened. I'm sorry. I'm confusing things. I was thinking that white takes and then d4 was played. No, it happened like that. But the thing is, what black achieved with that c5 break, that bishop has a very strong, useful diagonal. Takes, back, and queen d6. Yeah, black can be very satisfied here. His bishops are wide open. And yeah, white has to think of being precise here and secure equal chances. The thing is, it's quite funny that in that game again, after some moves, we get opposite colored bishops. Yeah, okay, the position is very, very equalish. In fact, here white maybe has a slight pull because the bishop on d5 is a little bit annoying. But when you look at the game in more detail, which I won't do now, you will see that that slightly more active bishop is not enough to get anywhere serious. So we have a couple of more moves. They did put in some time, but ultimately this is not leading anywhere. White seems to be a bit better, but there was no there's no win to be found. Yeah, funny. Black has that strong counterplay with the pawn there, and will draw. Yeah, bishop e3. That forces the draw.
Check.
Because this is a pure perpetual. This is
check.
One way to check, or to g2, after which
check.
Queen e2 is going to be the perpetual. Here,
check. Check.
And draw. Yeah, so that also seemed rather correct, solid game here by Caruana and Anand. I actually had a really wrong recollection how that central tension was resolved, but ultimately the key moment was in the opening that c5 move that made sure that the bishop on g7 actually has got something to do. Okay, so now let's go to the main game of that video. Wesley So with white against Aronian. Yeah, what opening to expect in that game? Difficult, because Wesley So is playing basically all moves on move 1. Yeah, d4 this time, and we get a Nimzo Indian. He goes for f3. This is probably the sharpest line that has a still sound reputation. The Sämisch is probably the sharpest with a3, but this is somewhat dodgy. I mean, I play it quite a bit in my blitz games via the e3 move order, but objectively speaking, it is somewhat dodgy, and f3 is the somewhat modernized version of the Sämisch, where white wants to grab that huge center and, if possible, do that without wasting a move on a3. Aronian goes with c5. This is a move that I've got lots of sympathy for, of course, because it's the move that I also have in my book. d5, castles, e4, d6. Yes, it was interesting for me to see that Aronian is playing that. This is one of the lines that I have in my book. I have in this position I have both b5 and I give d6 as the somewhat less chaotic alternative. After b5 in Blumenfeld style, white has the move e5. And this after knight d8 f4 is really leading to crazy complications. The d6 line, however, is a little bit more, I mean, you cannot call it solid, but at least, let's say, it's a little bit less dependent on knowledge of concrete lines. You get a strategically sharp position here, and not so much a position that really has to be calculated move by move as it is with the b5 line where you allow e5. Wesley played knight g to e2 now, which is probably the main continuation. After bishop d3, which looks a little bit more natural, actually to get this in, black can play and will play b5. This is a delayed b5 pawn sacrifice. It leads to really good play for black. Yeah, in many cases, black would have a huge initiative. It's especially important for white not to be too greedy. If you take stuff here, yeah, things like that, then black will have a tremendous compensation for that. Note that f3 is absolutely not well suited in this kind of position. Yeah, think of like c4, bishop c5, or queen to b6. What is that king saying about all this? White has to be careful. Knight e2 is, as I said, the main move. The move bishop d2 is interesting and was played last year in a game between Nakamura with white and Carlsen. The reason why I'm mentioning it is that probably the best reply to that move is takes, knight h5, which, funny enough, Aronian had on the board about 10 years ago. So they have some relation to that line, the players. At least Aronian, yeah, he had some experience from the white side. Knight e2, as I said, was played. And now in my book, I have the standard move there, b5. Again, sharp pawn sacrifice, after which white has basically figured out after a while that taking the pawn isn't a good idea. So the main move is knight f4. Yeah, intending also to take on e6. And here I think black is okay with both a6, what I have in my book, and e takes d5, which was played earlier this year. I think in the Norway chess event by Topalov with black against Giri with a win at the end. As I said, my move in the book is a6, which is just delaying that capture for one moment, but it leads to the same thing. Yeah, a6, however, was played by Levant. Interesting move. The idea is that after a possible e takes d5, c takes d5, we are ready to push b5. So in many cases, a useful move. a4 was played. I would have been really reluctant to play that. It looks, I don't know, it doesn't feel right to me to weaken the queen side like that and give black that safe and comfortable bishop position, but maybe it was a necessary thing to do. When black had b5 up its sleeve, to be honest, I'm rather skeptical of the white position here in general. He's not very well developed, and black has possibilities to get active quickly, and we see one of them. Bishop a5, that's a funky little move, intending b5 again. Yeah, it's not so easy to understand, but if you, let's say white plays a move like that, then b5 is an interesting possibility, because this okay, bishop e3 is maybe a bad way to show it. He went bishop d2. Let's just say you go here, right? Then b5 is the move. Takes, and now bishop c3 is threatened with check. Now that's one point of that bishop move to a5. Yeah, bishop d2 was played, probably for that reason. Now b5 is really just losing a pawn. Takes, and now knight h5. Remember that earlier idea from that game that Aronian had with white? Okay, this is very similar. Now we have like knight e2 and bishop a5 and the a pawns inserted, but the idea is the same. The quick knight h5 is intending two things: that really disturbing check on h4, and the second thing is pawn to f5, trying to crack open that center. We should never forget that it's all about checkmating the opponent's king. And what is white's king doing on e1? Yeah, he's not safe. Black's king is the much safer piece here. Yeah? So a dangerous situation already for white after knight h5. He went g3. That's understandable. Yeah. Queen h4 is pretty awkward. g3. And knight d7. If black tries to go f5, he has to reckon with taking, piece takes, and g4. However, queen h4 will be rather strong. So probably bishop g2, not taking, as g4 is no follow-up. And here, after takes, I think the position is about equal. f5 was an interesting alternative. Aronian, however, went knight d7. Why not? Bishop g2, trying to use that g3 move to give it some kind of purpose. And here we go. b5. Yeah, what happens now? If white takes that and takes here, then he has to get the king out in the open. Not a good idea. So it's not just a pawn grab, let's say, after b5. So what did he play? What did So play? It's always tricky. I use that so word rather often anyway, and now one of the players is actually called So. Difficult stuff. Yeah, what did he do? What did Wesley play? This is why I say Wesley quite often. What did he play? He went for g4, and I understand that this knight was immensely annoying on h5, but I think after g4, black's position gets very, very, very good. And especially from a practical point of view, it is hellish to play what now happens. Probably he should have been a bit more conservative, let's say, with castling b4 and back, and now black can do some things. Bishop b6 with that intention. I mean, I'd rather be black here because white's pieces seem rather uncoordinated. If we check all that, it kind of is not working together. But still, it doesn't look like white is falling apart in a couple of moves. After g4, however, it's a different scenario. b4. Knight went back. Yeah, if white takes, then
check.
Black will get something back here. And again, still after knight e5, and then f5 will have a very strong initiative for what is only a pawn. Yeah, so nothing much in particular. Knight b1 was played here immediately, however.
Check.
Check. King f1. Yeah, and here, if we look at this position, which is a key position really, it's important to not be too materialistic here. We are playing for an attack on white's king, and a move like, let's say, knight h back to f6 is simply awful. Yeah, we don't want to lose that time. White in particular gets in bishop e1 here, but it's not so much about the concrete move, but about the spirit in which you have to play. If white is doing all those wacky things, yeah, knight was developed, it has to go back. Yeah, you have the king in the f file, somewhere in the middle, and everything looks kind of uncoordinated. What you have to do is check the most aggressive continuations and try to open up the position towards the king. The move that Aronian played is strong. I was also thinking that f5 might be a continuation. I mean, let me show what he did. Aronian played knight e5. He offered sacrifice that knight. It's a good move. I was thinking before I looked at knight e5 that f5 might be an interesting move. The idea is that after the knight capture, we do this, and this looks really, really bad. Yeah? That king on f1, the open f file, nah, better not. It's much better to take f5, for example, here with the pawn, and then again knight e5 is an interesting option. After white takes, knight f3 leads to a fantastic attack that is probably decisive. There were many interesting attacking possibilities, but the move knight e5 as played by Aronian is strong, so we don't need to look for an improvement. It's just that there were interesting alternatives that can be explored. Yeah, I think that here probably white should have taken that knight on h5. It does not seem to lead into a forced loss for white, and if that is not the case, you probably should grab some material for your suffering. He played bishop e1, but let's have a quick look at this here, and then f5, of course. Yeah, we have to break open the position. We need a rook on the f file in play. Yeah, and now after f5, bishop e1 maybe, pushing that back, queen back, and then f4 is a move that the computer is suggesting. Is a typical line, which is kind of crazy, but we see that white's king is under huge in huge trouble, and probably in a practical game it will be difficult, but white probably had to do that. Just grab that piece and hope for the best. He went bishop e1, after which queen f6 was played. Now he took that piece and knight f3. Yeah, and now we see that this is a very awkward situation. Black is threatening all kinds of discoveries with that knight. White doesn't have much choice. He has to play bishop f2. Yeah, and here I'm not totally sure, but I mean, it's a matter of how much time you want to invest when you look at this game. Aronian played the move bishop g4, which leads to a very dangerous initiative, and maybe it also is winning somehow, but it's yeah, it cannot be ignored that queen takes b2, just grabbing that thing and grabbing the rook next, was a good continuation. Yeah, bishop takes, queen a1, and the queen is not cut off from black's camp. It can return. I think black is probably better here by quite some by quite some margin, but I understand that Aronian rather wanted to continue the attack on the king, bishop g4. It seems that there is no clear-cut defense, but at least white could have put up a huge resistance, I believe, with knight d2 in this position. For example, after knight d4, there's e5, activating that bishop on g2. After queen takes e5, for example, takes knight f3, white is holding on. It is not fun, black is better, but it's not a direct loss for him. The way it went, it was a direct loss. Queen c1, and now a strong move, knight d4. Yeah, double attacking here and basically forcing a trade on d4, after which the c file gets opened up. Black is a piece down, but white's coordination is absolutely awful. e5, yeah, trying to get some space. Takes, knight d2, rook c8. Yeah, gladly will use the half open file, queen to b1. And now, how is this to be finished? Very nicely played by Aronian now. He played the move b3, just pushing that pawn forward. The idea is to get that entry square on c2. Yeah, if white is playing a nothing move, we would go rook c2 and probably just win the game in short order. This is why white took that. Knight b3 and bishop b6. This has a clear purpose, looking at f2. a5 was played, and here Aronian had the opportunity to finish the game off a little bit quicker than it happened in the game. The move rook c2 was a very spectacular solution here. Very nice. We are threatening mate, and yeah, what can white do? I mean, if you try to cover that, you get hit with this. So what are you doing? Probably taking. Then d3 is happening, and look at this here, and bishop e2. And this means that white is losing huge chunks of material. He has to give up the queen and can try to struggle from here, but it will probably not lead to anything much. Black is winning. Yeah, the move rook c2 was a very spectacular way to end it, but Aronian just went to a7, which is totally fine, of course. It will win. The black attack is too strong. Those pieces here are tied down, they are pinned, or they are sitting in the corner in case of the rook on h1 without having any particular purpose. And black is attacking with almost all of his pieces. So, okay, king to g1, bishop f5, bishop e4, check, king f1 and queen f4, and here Wesley resigned. The point is and problem is that if white takes on f5, which seems very normal looking, then d3 will lose the house. They will actually be checkmated in short order, or white loses basically everything. So a nice attacking game here by Levon. It seems that he is back in shape in that event. He had a very nice win in the first round against Caruana, and now again a nice win here with the black pieces out of a Nimzo line that I really have some sympathy for. I think black seems to be okay, and in practical games quite often the activity that you get in that Nimzo Benoni structure, if you think about that knight h5 move here, these ideas, and then f5, this is very active, enterprising play, and it is allowed by this non-symmetrical c5 based way of playing against f3. Yeah, this was round 4 of the Sinquefield Cup. 4 games that featured opposite colored bishops, and unfortunately not very exciting games. However, So with white versus Aronian, I think was very nice. Good effort by Aronian. Round 5 is played on the Thursday. This time I'll be doing the live commentary for the Internet Chess Club, the ICC, together with Grandmaster Lars Bo Hansen. I'm really looking forward to that. It's a very nice job to have, yeah, looking at those games and trying to explain what's going on, especially if you have such a competent analysis partner. If you are a member of the ICC, make sure to join us. Will be much fun. I will still do a game of the day or a round recap, I have to call it, video after that. It will be relatively late German time, but what can you do? Just look forward to that. I'm going to cover round 5 in the same way I covered round 4 here. Okay guys, thanks for watching.